Welcome back to the Soundbox! As you can see, I did a little rearranging because I remembered it gets cold in the winter and I can't put the heater anywhere else. In other news, it's time to start work on the stick Dulcimer, and the first step is to get all my ducks in a row. I already have the cutting and drilling layout, pictured here, so I just need a sanding spindle and a bending jig. I decided to start with the bending jig using old door wood, but one of the pieces had sort of a rough edge and needed cleaning up. I could really use a shaving horse for this, but I don't have room for that. After that, it was time for a quick little bit of action on the bandsaw. First, I narrow down the piece. Nice and slow, keeps the cut nice and straight, but I went too fast and got kinda sloppy. Check out that curve. Time to cut a nice round shape off the unplaned corner. The other piece isn't all dinged up like the other, so I just go straight to using the first piece as a template to scratch the second, and then I repeat the process. I'll be using this poplar turning square as the neck and shoulders of my instrument. I take the two pieces over to the table and clamp them up to make sure I like the fit. Doesn't quite match the height of the poplar, but I'll take it. Good to go. Finally, I sand off some sharp corners to make sure the outer bending jig won't mark up the sides. Ha! Check this out. Door peg. The other piece has them too on the back side. Next, it's time to tackle the sanding spindle. I didn't properly mise en place for this shot, so I stopped the camera and tracked down what I need. I need this spindle because the store-bought one I have is too big. To help with this, I've 3D printed up some smaller jaws for the chuck. This set here was set up for something smaller. Tool now in hand, I take it off to put on the other set. This was tedious. Before I make the spindle, it's important to make sure the inside curve on these jaws is nice and straight. Otherwise, I'll end up with an off-center mass when I put the completed spindle in the drill press. I don't want that. Learning from earlier, I tracked down what I think I need for this part before I hit record again. Here, I have a chuck and spindle taken from a dead drill, along with a countersink bit I grabbed because it's one of the few short bits I have. Unfortunately, it's too small to even touch the jaws when fully closed. After trying a regular drill bit, I grab my big unibit to figure out what size I need and hunt around these old spade bits until I find what I'm after. I wouldn't recommend spade bits for this. It rattles like crazy and the bit gets shoved around. I need a good set of Forstner bits. After this is done, the inside is a bit rough and I struggle to open the jaws. You can see why here. All that friction melted the plastic together a bit, so I need to just scrape that out. The unit radius is still very rough, and at some point I think I'll buy some adhesive-backed foam rubber and cover that up. Looking over the footage so far to work on this script, I'm a bit self-conscious about the low quality. A better camera is definitely the next item on my big purchases list, and some lighting would likely help things too. Once I finally chuck in an old practice piece, I give an accidental demonstration of why the live center in the tailstock needs to be used on longer workpieces, especially with softer woods like this scrap pine. The base got chewed up pretty good by that. After I get everything nice and tight, I go ahead and turn out all the blur that I can see just to get warmed up. Then I grab my skinniest chisel, which seems to work pretty well as a parting tool, and cut the length down to something manageable. I know I'm through when everything suddenly goes crooked. I may have tightened the live center a little too far. From here, I clean up the end and start narrowing down the piece some more. I need to get below an inch in diameter, and here you can almost see it's about a tenth over. I keep going until I'm about a fifth under, and then I go take a break. When I get back, I bring a jar with me and squirrel away some of the shavings for a later project, and then I drill the piece out a quarter inch to match the bolts I have. This tiny little wheel is really annoying to use, so I need to do something about that later. After that, I need to even up the diameter along the length of the spindle. To do that, I take a narrow scrap of particle board and stick some of my adhesive-backed sandpaper on it. The adhesive is old and not very tacky, so I try to use a heat gun to reinvigorate it. That seems to work, and when I put the roll away, I wrap a rubber band around it to keep it from unraveling. With the sandpaper in place, I use the far edge of the lathe frame as a pivot point and press the sandpaper against my spindle. I quickly realize I should be wearing my mask and put that on, and then I finish. Finally, I part it off with the skinny chisel and take my spindle over to the table. I mount the spindle on a 3.5 inch long bolt and tighten a nut onto it, and then I grab the roll of sandpaper. The rubber band breaks when I take it off, so I need to find another way to stop it from unraveling. After completing my sanding spindle, it was time to call it a night and let the dust clear out. After spending a few days recovering from a bit of shop crud because I forgot beards mess with respirators, I come back down to do some off-screen mise en place and notice a bit of information missing from the printed cutting plans. I go back to the source file to fix it, and after a few more delays, I begin work on the stick itself. First, I measure out and mark everything I need, and then I decide on the order of operations. Even before doing any cutting or drilling, I can already see the goal beginning to take shape, and I'm getting excited. And I get a massive chip out because I didn't put anything under the workpiece. I decide I can still make it work with a little decoration and drill the other 2 peg holes, making sure to back the piece this time. I start drilling one of the larger holes I need and quickly realize no amount of backing will stop the chip outs here. I need pilot holes. After finishing all the drilling, I move to the bandsaw. I need to cut the rough shape of the neck first because I don't want the loose fork ends getting broken by accident. I take my time to get a nice, mostly straight cut and set aside the offcut to use later as kerf lining. I can bevel the sides of the neck later, so for now I move on to the scroll saw. The camera gets in the way here, so I stop recording and just finish taking out the peg head. After that, it's back to the bandsaw to fork the piece and bust the offcut out with a little help from a chisel. I set this piece aside to use later and clean up the fork cut with the sanding spindle I made earlier. After I thin down the sides some more on the belt sander and clean the round part again, I put things down and call it a night. The next evening, it's time to bend the sides. I bring out this remnant from the Kalimba project to compare against the spread to avoid scratching its twin, which I plan to use as the top of this instrument. I start with a heat gun and spray bottle, and it gets quite far along. I then move to the steam cleaner. The heat is more reliable with this, and I'm not worried about drying out the wood. Finally, the steamer joins forces with the heat gun to spread the wood just a little more. I'll need to hit it multiple times over the next several days to minimize spring back, so this is a good spot to stop the video. I'll catch you next time. For now, the steamer's already hot, and I need to bend something for an unrelated project. Cheers!